So it's a great honor for me to be able to recognize and yield to my friend from Iowa, the chairman of the House Term Limits Caucus, Rod Blum.
I thank my good friend, Mr. DeSantis, from the state of Florida for hosting this special order on term limits and giving me the opportunity to speak on this most important subject. Albert Einstein once said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, yet expecting different results. That quote sums up Washington, D.C. We keep sending the same people back here over and over and over, yet we expect things will improve. We expect things will change. Congressional approval ratings, if you haven't checked, are in the single digits. It's clear that the American people aren't happy with the job we're doing. They want change in Washington, D.C. But if we truly want to change Washington, we need to heed Albert Einstein's advice. We need to send different people here. We need to do things differently. Changing the way Congress operates should start with enacting term limits. I firmly believe congressional term limits would restore the public's confidence in the legislative branch and return this body back to the design intended by our founding fathers. I've just been here, as my friend Mr. DeSantis said, for over a year, and I can confidently say that term limits for our politicians would be a huge step forward in changing the culture here in Washington, D.C., and I urge my colleagues to support this common sense reform. Mr. Speaker, this is the first elected office I've ever held. I'm a career small business person. And in the private sector, if we don't listen to our customers, we go out of business. In Congress, our customers are the American people, and they are strongly in favor of term limits. Recent polls show overwhelming support. Over 75% of Americans want term limits. And this support, as Mr. DeSantis said, crosses party lines with strong majorities from Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. Unfortunately, Congress has not listened to our customers. Legislation to institute term limits continues to sit in committee without receiving a vote. And while many members of Congress profess support for term limits back in their districts, when their plane crosses the Potomac, something seems to change. One of the first things I did after being sworn in was to launch the Bipartisan Term Limits Caucus, along with my colleague from Texas, Congressman Beto O'Rourke. I also co-sponsored legislation from my colleagues Mr. Salmon of Arizona and Mr. DeSantis of Florida, limiting House members from serving no more than 3 terms and senators from serving no more than 2 terms. I did this because as someone coming to Congress from the private sector, I believe Washington suffers from a lack of fresh, innovative ideas. And also Washington suffers from a lack of political courage on the part of career politicians to implement those changes. The root of our problem is that our politicians are incentivized by this system to care more about staying in office rather than doing what is best for the country. Most candidates campaign for the U.S. House, and they say something to the effect, Washington, D.C. is broken. Washington, D.C. is broken. It must change. They say this during the campaign. Most come here for the right reasons. But over time, the system grinds them down. The special interests get their proverbial nose under the tent, and before long, special interests own a congressman. It seems to me the only special interest group not represented in Washington is we, the people. The end result, most become part of the very problem they came to Washington, D.C. to fix. Our founding fathers never intended for public service to be a career. Serving in Congress was supposed to be a temporary sacrifice made for the public good, not a profitable, long-term profession treated like a family business. By limiting terms politicians can serve in office, we can realign the incentives. When members of Congress know they will only serve for a short amount of time, they will be incentivized to actually tackle the big problems facing America today. Tackling our $19 trillion debt that's growing, tackling the looming insolvency of Social Security and Medicare, tackling securing of our borders, and the ever-growing federal bureaucracy that stifles economic growth and holds down wages for your average American. Mr. DeSantis, I recognize the long odds of Congress voting to place term limits on themselves. As I often say, that's much like asking turkeys to vote for Thanksgiving, and we know how that would end up. But I'll keep pushing Congress to act because it's what the American people want. In the meantime, there are some positive developments at the state level that I'd like to highlight. Florida recently became one of the first states to officially call for an Article 5 constitutional term limits convention, thanks to the hard work of Florida activists and fantastic groups like U.S. Term Limits. I commend the Florida legislature and hope other states will soon follow suit. As President Reagan once said, a convention is a safety valve giving the people a chance to act if Congress refuses to. Mr. Speaker, I'm not here to criticize individual members of Congress, and not all of my colleagues who have been in office for decades are part of this problem. But it's time Congress listens to our customers and gives our customers what they want, a vote on term limits. It's the right thing to do, and it may be our last and best chance to restore trust in government and make Congress work for the American people once again. And once again, I thank Mr. DeSantis for the opportunity to discuss this most important subject. I urge my colleagues to listen to the American people and join the Term Limits Caucus and co-sponsor term limit legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.